Good morning, Dan and Amy. And so just hours away from, I think...
First face-to-face.
Yeah, CNN's got the countdown clock on.
11 hours.
Of course they do.
22 minutes, and now 19 seconds.
Is it breaking news if you got to wait 11 hours for it?
I mean, why
that's a question CNN
That's
could
fake
answer.
news, man.
And so what does Trump aim to get out of it? What does Kim Jong-un aim to get out of it? It's difficult to know.
And what will they wear?
But what would progress, if not immediate success, look like from the summit? For more on this topic, we're pleased to be joined by Rich Lowry, who, of course, is the editor of National Review, Fox News contributor, author of the book Lincoln Unbound. Rich, thanks for joining us again. Appreciate it.
Thanks for having me.
So is this going to be, as I suggested, like a Red Dawn 2 ass-kicking? It's an under-heralded sequel. Remember, it's the North Koreans who invaded. It wasn't the Cubans and the Russians.
Right. I forgot. I think also in Olympus Has Fallen, the movie about the White House being taken over by a bunch of guys in a trash truck. I think they're North Koreans too.
All right. So which is it going to be more like? Olympus Has Fallen or Red Dawn 2?
I think neither. There's gonna be a bro hug at the end of this. Maybe not exactly a bro hug, but maybe a shoulder grab or something that indicates
piggyback ride
of feeling. Yeah, because I think Kim desperately wants a good summit, and I think Trump wants a good summit too. And I think you look at the polling on this thing beforehand, like 77% of Americans support the idea of having this summit, and if there's something that shows a reduction of tensions, it's going to be very popular domestically here in the United States, even if it's not great policy. And that's my fear. I think any relaxation of the sanctions is playing into the North Koreans' hands.
Well, we know that it's going to be President Trump, Kim Jong-un, and then 2 translators, and that's it. That's going to be in the room. But they kept saying that this first meeting is just going to be a get-to-know-you kind of meeting, and that there may be a follow-on, and that possibly Kim Jong-un might be invited to the White House. Am I getting above my skis here?
Well, yeah, I'm not sure I would ever want this character in the White House, but I think the lowering of expectations is a good thing. If nothing happens at the summit and we are going to maintain the policy of maximum pressure, I think that's great. My fear is that just if there are warm feelings out of the summit, even if nothing's agreed, the South Koreans will want to take that and run with it and say, well, we have all these infrastructure projects, Mr. President, we want to pursue with the North. You're getting along with the maximum leader there. Let us go ahead. And it's going to be hard to say no. And if we can't say no to the South Koreans, and the Chinese will do everything they can to begin unspooling the sanctions. So my fear is that even if it's not our explicit policy to let up on the maximum pressure, that will be the result of this meeting tomorrow morning.
Much is made by the punditocracy that Trump really wants this to be successful. Of course he does, but that he's willing to do anything and put a veneer over something that potentially would be bad policy just in the hopes of trying to sell progress or some kind of victory towards peace to the domestic audience here. But couldn't you make the argument, as Holman Jenkins sort of makes in the Wall Street Journal over the weekend, that actually Kim Jong-un wants this more badly than does Trump, because he wants to prop up his regime, and there's a need for assistance beyond the Chinese to do that?
It could be. I mean, it's a little hard to know, and the key question is how low are they on cash reserves? I mean, if they literally run out of money, they have a big problem. But the North Korea's strategy over the last 30 years, which they've unfortunately played brilliantly, is to continually develop their nuclear and missile programs, sometimes surreptitiously in violation of agreements. At the same time, they're constantly negotiating over giving up those programs and getting economic benefits from doing it. So what's new here so far, and is somewhat encouraging, is that we haven't really let up the pressure. In the past, we've just let up the pressure in exchange for talks, which is insane. So if we can literally keep the pressure up and just see whether any vague promises come to anything, that's a reasonable approach. It's just I fear the worst. One, because National Review has never supported any summit meeting with any communist dictator ever. Even when Ronald Reagan was doing it. Two, just the North Koreans. This is all they do. This is what their life depends on it. They're really good at this. Whereas, President Trump has, and the U.S. government has about, a dozen other plates in the air. Whereas Kim, this is all he's focused on is how to get out of the economic noose.
And what about China's role in all of this? We know that they provided Kim Jong-un the 747, so he would arrive in the same type of aircraft that President Trump did, and that they met twice last week, the president of China and Kim Jong-un.
Again, it's opaque. It's a little hard to tell, but it seems as though perhaps with when Trump agreed to the summit, that the Chinese feared getting cut out of the action. And it may be that Kim has used that to get the Chinese to relieve some of their pressure. Certainly there are indications that there's more border traffic now between China and North Korea than there was a little while ago, and Trump has obliquely referred to that as well in some of his public statements. I think China, their game, they don't want this problem to go away. This problem is very good for them because they can constantly use it against the West and the United States. You see it in the ZTE affair, this horrific state-owned enterprise in China that's violated all sorts of laws. Well, the China, we were on the verge of driving that thing out of business, but then we ended up giving up the pressure because China was going to help us have this negotiation with North Korea. That's the game that China always wants to play geostrategically.
Now, over the weekend, the sniping between President Trump and Prime Minister Trudeau raised some eyebrows.
Hey ho, too soon.
And then one of them.
I honestly thought that was Photoshop.
Then one of them became unglued. That's how tense the atmosphere was.
He should go back to threading. He won't need to have a false eyebrow.
What about that? What about Larry Kudlow, I know is a friend of yours. Man, he was tough on Trudeau over the weekend, and it seems admitted or reasonably so that. He thought there was progress being made. Trump's talked about eliminating trade barriers, eliminating tariffs, eliminating subsidies, kind of a new free trade Trump. And then Trudeau takes shots at him for the tariffs he has imposed, and then the whole thing blows up.
I'm still getting the ground truth on this one. It seems to me what Trudeau did is fairly typical. You're in a private meeting and everything's warm and cordial and everyone wants to get along, and then when you're giving your press conference, you want to play politics for your domestic audience, so you sound much tougher. So it just on the basis of that, it didn't seem very good grounds for blowing the whole thing up. I do think the idea, one, that the Western alliance is ending is a little bit ridiculous. I mean, the ties here in terms of interest and values are very deep. They're not going away. Two, the Canadians have ridiculous tariffs to protect their dairy industry. The EU, the whole point of it is to create a relatively free trade bloc within the borders of the EU, and then have protection against competition outside the EU. So the idea that all these other countries are robust and pure, libertarian free traders is not true. I wouldn't necessarily embrace the president's rhetoric or tactics on a lot of this stuff, but I think the critics are a little over the top.
Do you think maybe Shania Twain can be enlisted to do a little shovel diplomacy between the two countries, like Rodman style?
Yeah, I have to say, the idea that we need steel and aluminum tariffs on Canada for national security reasons struck me as ridiculous, but we shouldn't be going out of our way to actually see that we do need those tariffs for national security reasons. So I prefer the relationships between our leaders to be cool and correct, even if they have disagreements, rather than kind of outrageous and inflammatory.
I mean, look at Peter Navarro. He's like, there's a special place in hell for leaders like Trudeau. When it came to trade, He was on, Fox and Friends, and I thought the, hyperbole was a little too much. What did you think?
Yeah, and the real trade challenge is China. I mean, they're an enormous mercantilist power, has an enormous market that makes our firms play by their rules, go over there and give them our intellectual property, in effect, that allows them to sort of bully and intimidate other countries to going along with their rules, and that should be our target. And we need all these other countries to kind of help us pressure China. So I think China is a challenge the next 30 years, probably on par with the Soviet Union, and we need to be focused much more seriously on that.
Back here at home, this story that broke last week, sort of underreported, shocking. But Andy McCarthy at National Review took it up. The indictment of James Wolfe, the former security director for the Senate Select Committee on Intelligence, leaking classified information to a New York Times reporter with whom he was having a personal relationship, and the Department of Justice coming down hard on him, as well as acknowledging that they called years worth of emails and other communications between this reporter and Mr. Wolfe. Jonathan Turley from GW Law had an interesting piece over the weekend where he suggests this is really bad news for Andy McCabe. Andy McCabe, who it admits to leaking classified information to New York Times, but said he had the authorization to do it. Jim Comey says there was no such authorization. Andy McCabe, who's already been referred for potential criminal prosecution. Boy, how do you not prosecute Andy McCabe if you're going to prosecute this Senate intel staffer?
Yeah, it's a little hard to know without knowing all the details. But we're nailing people to the walls and ruining their lives over lying to the FBI, George Papadopoulos and others. You shouldn't lie to the FBI, but what's good for the goose should be good for the gander, and it shouldn't be that just people who happen to get caught up in the maw of a special counsel probe, they're the only ones who are held to the standard. So if it, as it appears, McCabe just flat out lied, I think he should be in a lot of trouble. And one point Andy McCarthy made is, you tell folks on the left, the president has executive privilege, and a presidential campaign shouldn't be just having counterintelligence investigation against it like a foreign power lightly, and the president shouldn't be forced to testify lightly because he has sort of a unique role in our constitutional system. People, the left goes crazy. You're just a Trump apologist. You're just bending your knee to him and saying he's above the law. But then you actually, in a criminal investigation, leak investigation, you catch up a reporter, and all of a sudden, wait a minute, you can't do that. A reporter has a special status in our system. There's the First Amendment. There are all sorts of sensitivities around it. And, I think there's a lot to that point that, we do need to be careful around reporters, but the President of the United States also has his privileges and sensitivities.
Unless the reporter's named James Rosen, then not so much.
Exactly.
Rich Lowry, editor of National Review, Fox News contributor, author of the book Lincoln Unbound. Rich, thanks as always for joining us. Appreciate it.
Hey, thanks for having me. Have a great day.
And he joined us on our turnkey.pro answer line.